9 of them. That's what the
Adjusting for
mercenary
wind.
had said over the radio
Copy.
40 minutes
Target is
ago,
stable.
his voice crackling through the static with the kind of
Focus.
certainty
This
that
cold
comes
won't
from
forgive
men who've
mistakes.
killed
Yes, sir.
enough to
Good.
stop
Now,
counting.
on your feet.
Sir.
9 trained shooters
Team, this is the
positioned
target
across this
compound.
mountain,
Primary
each one a
entry is
thread
here.
in a web
Sir, what
designed
about
to
secondary
catch and
perimeters?
kill anyone
Covered.
foolish
Move in
enough
tandem.
to approach the
Target
compound below.
confirmed. Wind
Staff
5
Sergeant
knots
Alara
left. Hold
Blackwell
breath.
lay motionless in the frozen dirt of
Hit.
the Big Bear
Target
Mountains,
down.
her body so
Target
perfectly
confirmed. Wind at
integrated
2
with the
left.
landscape
Copy,
that she
fire.
becomes something other than
Hit.
human.
Solid impact.
Not a
Confirmed.
woman, not a soldier, just another shadow among the pines and another stone among the granite outcroppings that dotted this California ridgeline like the broken teeth of some ancient god. Her ghillie suit, a carefully constructed second skin of burlap strips and local vegetation, moved with the wind, not against it, with it. The distinction mattered. It always mattered. Through her scope, she watched the water tower. The target sat motionless behind the rusted metal framework, a darker shadow against the pre-dawn gray. He'd been there for 67 hours. She knew because she'd been watching for 67 hours. She knew his shift patterns, knew he favored his left shoulder, rolling it every 18 to 20 minutes to relieve some chronic injury. Knew he drank from a canteen at the top of every third hour. Knew the exact rhythm of his breathing when he was fully focused versus when his attention wandered. She knew him the way a wolf knows a deer. Her finger rested against the trigger guard of her rifle. Not on the trigger, not yet. That would come. But first the waiting, always the waiting. Beside her, close enough to touch but invisible in his own ghillie suit, Corporal Tobias Harlan shifted his weight by perhaps a quarter of an inch. His spotter scope tracked the same target through the darkness. 67 hours, 12 minutes, he whispered into his headset, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who'd given up being afraid and graduated into something more efficient, a kind of cold professional dread. You need water. I had water 2 hours ago. I'm fine. You said that 6 hours ago, too. I was fine then. I'm fine now. A pause, the kind of pause that carried weight. Stop counting the hours, Toby. Somebody has to. Another pause. This one different, sharper. Your hands are shaking, he said. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. She would have known if they were shaking. A sniper's hands were not hands anymore. They were instruments. And she kept them calibrated the way a musician keeps their instrument. Clean, still, ready. They're not shaking, she said. Toby didn't argue. That was one of the things she valued about him. He'd push exactly once, then let it go, and he'd be right there when the moment came. Through the scope, the water tower man rolled his left shoulder. 18 minutes since the last time. Like clockwork. Like everything else in this mountain was clockwork once you watched it long enough. Alara exhaled once. A controlled release of breath that began in her diaphragm and ended in absolute stillness. Then she pulled the trigger. The suppressed report was almost nothing. A dry crack absorbed by the mountain and the wind and the vast indifference of the California wilderness. Through the scope, she watched the water tower man's silhouette change in a way that was final and absolute. He never rolled his shoulder again. Target down, Toby said, and his voice had changed too. Had shed whatever was human in it for the duration of what came next. Alara was already cycling the bolt, already finding the second target, already breathing into the rhythm of the thing she'd come here to do. Because this wasn't the beginning of the mission. This was the end of a story that had started 72 hours ago in a briefing room that smelled like stale coffee and institutional desperation. This was the end of a story that had started 4 years ago, when a man she trusted told her she wasn't good enough. This was the moment when impossible became inevitable. But to understand how she got here lying in the frozen dirt about to kill 8 more trained mercenaries before they even knew she existed, you have to go back. You have to go back to where it started. You have to go back to the dismissal. The FBI Tactical Operations Center in San Bernardino occupied the 3rd floor of a concrete building that had no business looking as institutional as it did. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of furniture that suggested the budget had been allocated by someone who'd never actually sat in a chair for more than 10 minutes. Alara sat in one of those chairs now, her hands folded in her lap, her expression giving away nothing as the mission brief unfolded on the projector screen. Silas Grayson, white male, 43 years old, former DARPA engineer turned domestic terrorist. 17 confirmed bombings over the course of 22 months. 19 dead, 47 injured. Currently hiding in a fortified compound in the Big Bear Mountains with unknown security measures and an unknown number of associates. The photographs scrolled past. Crime scenes, blast patterns, victims. She watched them all with the same flat attention she gave everything. Not detached, not cold, just controlled. The way you had to be if you were going to look at what human beings did to each other and still function afterward. At the front of the room, Gunnery Sergeant Everett Kane stood with his arms crossed, his face carved from something harder than the mountain they were about to assault. 54 years old, Marine Corps Scout sniper instructor for 2 decades, mission commander for this operation. The man who dismissed her from Scout Sniper School 4 years ago. Hostage rescue team goes in 72 hours. Kane said, his voice flat as a Kansas highway. Primary objective is to extract Grayson alive for interrogation. Secondary objective is to secure any intelligence regarding his network in upcoming operations. He clicked to the next slide. Satellite imagery of the compound. A cluster of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by dense pine forest and rocky terrain. Elevated positions marked in red. Our concern is Overwatch. Grayson's paranoid. He's been using private security since he went underground. We're anticipating resistance. One of the HRT operators raised his hand. What kind of resistance are we talking about? Kane glanced at Alara. Just once. A flicker of eye contact that lasted maybe half a second. Staff Sergeant Blackwhip will provide long-range reconnaissance and fire support. She's been assigned Overwatch for the operation. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when people are trying very hard not to react to something. The HRT team leader, a man named Vickers, with 20 years in and the scars to prove it, cleared his throat. Sir, isn't she the one you dismissed from Scout Sniper School? The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Kane's jaw tightened. She's qualified for this assignment. Questions about tactics. No one spoke. Alara didn't move, didn't react. Just sat there with her hands folded, watching the satellite imagery like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Because it was. Because she could already see the problems. The approach vectors, the potential firing positions. The way the terrain would funnel the HRT team through specific corridors that any competent defender would have pre-sighted. She could see it all, the way she always could. The brief continued. Logistics, timeline, communication protocols. Equipment manifests. The mechanical details of sending armed men into a confined space to drag out someone who very much didn't want to be dragged. When it ended, people filed out in clusters, their voices low and careful. No one looked at Alara. That was fine. She was used to not being looked at. She was gathering her notes when Kane spoke. Blackwell, a word. She stood, walked to the front of the room, stopped at a professional distance and waited. Kane studied her for a long moment. His face gave away nothing, but she'd trained under him long enough to read the micro-expressions, the slight tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw set when he was deciding whether to say something he knew he'd regret. This is a straightforward Overwatch assignment, he said finally. You provide reconnaissance. You call out threats. If HRT gets in trouble, you provide covering fire. That's all. Yes, sir. I don't need heroics. I wasn't planning on heroics, sir. Good. He paused. You're a competent shooter, Blackwell, but this isn't a range. These are professionals. If something goes wrong, I need you to fall back. Understand? She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the doubt there. The same doubt that had been there 4 years ago when he'd signed the paperwork that ended her military sniper career before it started. I understand, sir, she said. She understood that he didn't believe in her. She understood that he was assigning her to this operation because someone higher up the chain had insisted, and he couldn't refuse. She understood that in his mind, she was still the cadet who'd collapsed during the final physical qualification, her body temperature dropping to dangerous levels while stronger candidates pushed through. She understood all of it, and it didn't matter, because in 72 hours, she was going to show him exactly how wrong he'd been. The drive up to Big Bear took 6 hours in a civilian vehicle that Toby drove like he was afraid it would fall apart if he went over 40 miles per hour. They didn't talk much. Toby tried a few times comments about the weather, the terrain, the mission, but Alara's responses were so minimal that he eventually gave up and focused on the road. It wasn't that she disliked him. She didn't know him well enough to dislike him. He'd been assigned as her spotter 3 days ago, pulled from a different unit because the regular guy had come down with pneumonia. Fresh partnership. No trust built. No rhythm established. Which meant they had about 48 hours to figure out how to work together or people were going to die. Can I ask you something? Toby said, finally breaking an hour of silence. Alara looked at him. He was 24, she knew from his file. Grew up in rural Oregon. Enlisted at 18. Decent marksman. Solid tactical scores. No special operations experience. No combat deployments. You can ask, she said. Why'd Kane dismiss you from Scout Sniper School? She'd been expecting that question since the moment they'd been paired. Everyone wanted to know. It was the thing that defined her in military circles. The cadet who'd almost made it. The woman who couldn't hack it physically. Failed the final qualification, she said. What part? All of it. Everything after mile 18. Toby glanced at her, then back at the road. What happened at mile 18? My core temperature dropped to 94 degrees. I couldn't regulate heat properly. I collapsed. They pulled me from the course and recommended medical discharge from the sniper program. But you're still in. Different command, different evaluation. Someone decided I could be useful in a support role. Overwatch. Overwatch, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, no offense, but if you couldn't handle the physical requirements 4 years ago, how are you going to handle 72 hours in the field now? It was a fair question, the kind of question she'd asked herself 1,000 times in the years since her dismissal. The physical requirements measured the wrong things, she said. What do you mean? They measured endurance, resilience to cold, ability to push through pain. She paused. They didn't measure whether I could shoot, whether I could think, whether I could see patterns other people miss. And you'll find out in about 40 hours. They drove in silence after that. The terrain changed as they climbed. Desert scrub gave way to pine forest. The air cooled. Snow appeared in patches along the roadside, then in larger clusters, then as a continuous blanket covering everything. By the time they reached the staging point, a Forest Service access road that officially didn't exist on any map, it was full dark and the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. Toby killed the engine. This is it. 4 miles to the observation point on foot. Ilara opened her door. The cold hit her like a physical thing. Sharp, immediate. The kind of cold that found every gap in your clothing and exploited it. She felt her body temperature start to drop almost immediately. Felt the familiar sensation of her core trying to compensate, trying to hold heat against an environment that wanted to pull it away. And she smiled. Because this cold, this discomfort, this thing that had disqualified her 4 years ago, this was her advantage. Let's move, she said. It took them 3 hours to reach the observation point. Not because the terrain was difficult, though it was, but because Ilara moved through the forest like a ghost, stopping every 50 yards to listen, to observe, to integrate herself into the environment before taking another step. Toby, to his credit, tried to match her pace, but she could hear him. The slight scrape of his boot on granite, the whisper of fabric against bark, the small unconscious sounds that marked him as human, as separate from the mountain. She made no sounds. It wasn't training, it was something else. Something she'd discovered when she was 8 years old and her father had taken her hunting for the first time. The ability to stop being a person and start being a presence. A shadow. A possibility. Her father had called it going gray. The moment when you stopped trying to hide and simply became part of what was already there. By the time they reached the ridge overlooking the compound, she'd gone so gray that Toby actually walked past her twice while setting up his observation post. The second time she spoke, "I'm right here." He jumped, actually jumped, spun around with his hand on his sidearm before he registered her position, sitting against a rock outcropping not 3 feet from where he'd just placed his equipment bag. Jesus, he breathed. How long have you been there? 20 minutes. I walked right past you. I know. He stared at her for a long moment. In the moonlight, his face showed something between respect and unease. That's not normal, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. They set up in silence after that. Ilara selected her position with the kind of care most people reserve for surgery. Sight lines, wind patterns, backdrop, escape routes. Every variable mapped and measured and integrated into her understanding of the space. When she finally settled into her shooting position, the rifle coming to rest against her shoulder, like it had always been there, she closed her eyes. And she listened. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Slow, rhythmic. She could hear the frequency of it, could identify the subtle harmonics that told her the wind was coming from the northwest at about 6 kilometers per hour. She knew because her father had taught her, had spent years training her ear to hear what others couldn't. The way wind changed pitch as it accelerated. The way temperature shifts created pressure differentials you could track by sound alone. Most people thought wind reading was visual. Flags, mirage, vegetation movement. Her father had taught her it was acoustic. She opened her eyes. Wind's about to shift, she said. Toby checked his portable anemometer. Reading northwest at 7 kilometers per hour, steady. It's about to shift. 42 hertz frequency change, about 90 seconds. He looked at her like she'd started speaking a language he didn't recognize. 90 seconds later, the wind shifted. Northwest to west-northwest. The anemometer reading jumped to 6 kilometers per hour, then settled. Toby stared at the device, then at her. How did you... Oh, you can hear it, she said simply. If you know how to listen. He didn't respond. Just turned back to his scope, his mind clearly working through what he'd just witnessed. Alara began her observation. The compound sat in the valley 1,200 meters below. 3 main structures, 1 water tower, multiple outbuildings, vehicles parked in a rough semicircle, and the shooters. She found the first one within 10 minutes. Northridge elevated position behind a natural rock formation. Good sight lines to the eastern approach. Professional placement. The second one took longer. East wall integrated into what looked like a hunting blind. Harder to spot, but the geometry gave him away. The way the blind's opening aligned with the compound's main entrance. Third, fourth, fifth. She mapped them methodically, cross-referencing positions with Toby's thermal imaging, building a complete picture of the defensive network. By hour 12, she'd identified 7 positions. By hour 18, she knew there were more. The placement is too good, she said more to herself than to Toby. What do you mean? Look at the overlapping fields of fire, the mutual dead-angle coverage, the way each position supports the others. She paused. This isn't improvise. This is doctrine. What kind of doctrine? European, probably Eastern European, Russian or former Soviet. Toby was quiet for a moment, then, you're saying these aren't local militia. I'm saying these are professionals. As if to confirm her assessment, a radio transmission crackled through the frequency they'd been monitoring. 2 voices, brief, clipped, speaking a language that wasn't English. Toby looked at her. Was that Chechen, she said, or close to it? She keyed her radio to the command frequency. Reaper to command, threat assessment update. Kane's voice came back slightly distorted by the encryption. Go ahead, Reaper. Identifying professional defensive positions. Count is 7 confirmed, possibly 9 total. Radio intercepts suggest Chechen mercenaries. Recommend 24-hour delay for additional reconnaissance. Silence on the other end. She could picture Kane in the TOC weighing her assessment against the timeline, against the pressure from above, against his own doubts about her reliability. Finally, recommendation noted. Timeline unchanged. HRT insertion proceeds as scheduled. Continue reconnaissance. The transmission ended. Toby looked at her. He's not going to delay. No, even though you just told him we're looking at professional contractors. Especially because I told him. She adjusted her scope, tracking one of the positions. He thinks I'm overestimating the threat. Seeing ghosts because I'm nervous. Are you nervous? She considered the question. Examined her physiological state with the same clinical detachment she'd examine a weapon malfunction. Heart rate 58 beats per minute. Breathing steady. Hands still. No, she said. I'm calculating. The hours bled together after that. Day became night, became day. Alara slept in 20-minute increments, her internal clock waking her with the precision of an alarm. Each time she woke, she observed, logged, mapped. The defensive network revealed itself in layers. The obvious positions first, then the subtle ones, then the ones that only became visible when you watched the pattern of movement over time. By hour 36, she'd identified the 8th position. South approach, 3rd rock formation, exactly where the terrain would funnel any assault force. By hour 45, she knew there was a 9th. North Ridge position 3, she said, the one we tagged on the first night. What about him? He hasn't moved in 22 hours. Toby checked his log. So maybe he's disciplined. Professional hunters don't stay motionless for 22 hours. They shift. They adjust. They maintain circulation. She kept her eye to the scope. He's not maintaining a position. He's waiting. For what? For me. The temperature in their hide positions seemed to drop another degree. You think he's a dedicated counter sniper? Toby asked. I think if I were planning this defensive network and I knew an American assault force was coming, I'd position my best shooter where he could watch for their overwatch. She paused. I think that's exactly what someone did. She keyed her radio again. Reaper to command, additional assessment. Kane's response was immediate this time. What is it, Blackwell? Position 9 is a dedicated counter sniper. Probable professional hunter. If the assault proceeds, he'll be actively targeting our observation position. Another pause. Longer this time. Can you handle it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Could she handle it? Could she, the woman he had dismissed 4 years ago for not being physically resilient enough, handle a professional killer who was specifically hunting for her? Yes, sir, she said. Then handle it. HRT goes in 4 hours. Out. Alara lowered the radio. Toby was watching her. He doesn't believe you. No. Does that bother you? She thought about it, about Kane, about the dismissal, about spending 4 years watching from the outside while other people got the opportunities she'd been denied. It used to, she said. Now it's just data. He doubts me. I compensate for his doubt. The math doesn't care about feelings. That's a pretty cold way to look at it. Cold keeps you alive. She returned to her scope. Emotion costs oxygen. Oxygen costs accuracy. Accuracy costs lives. Toby was quiet for a long time after that. At hour 60, Kane's voice came over the radio one more time. All elements, this is command. HRT is moving to final staging. Insertion in 4 hours. Reaper confirmed status. Alara checked her equipment. Rifle clean, zeroed ready. Ammunition sufficient. Position optimal. Body hypothermic, but functional. Core temperature was probably around 95 degrees by now, but that was fine. That was normal. That was her baseline. Reaper confirms ready, she said. Copy. Rules of engagement. You are cleared to engage any hostile forces that threaten HRT, approach, or extraction. Priority is corridor security. Understood. A pause, then in a voice that carried something she couldn't quite identify. Reaper, for what it's worth. Good hunting. She didn't respond immediately. Let the silence stretch. Let him sit with whatever he was feeling. Finally, I don't need your blessing, sir. Just your silence on the net. She heard him exhale. A sharp, controlled breath that might have been frustration or might have been something else. Copy that. Command out. Toby looked at her in the darkness. That was harsh. That was honest. She began her pre-engagement routine. Mental checklist, wind patterns, range cards, sequence planning. He dismissed me 4 years ago because he measured the wrong things. I'm not going to let him measure me now. What if he's right? What if there's something you can't handle? She turned to face him. Really face him. Let him see her eyes in the moonlight. Then I die. And you report what happened. And maybe the next woman who doesn't fit the mold has better data to work with. She paused. But I'm not planning on dying, Toby. I'm planning on showing everyone exactly how wrong they were. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, he said. Walk me through your sequence. And so she did. Target by target. Calculation by calculation. Wind call by wind call. She laid out the entire plan with the precision of an engineer designing a bridge, accounting for every variable, every contingency, every possible point of failure. When she finished, Toby was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then, that's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. Why? Because it's going to work. He shook his head. You're actually going to kill 9 professional mercenaries in the time it takes most people to make coffee. 8, she corrected. The 9th, the counter-sniper he's going to move during my sequence. He'll become a dynamic problem. And you're planning for that. I'm planning for everything. The sky began to lighten in the east. Not sunrise yet. Just the first suggestion of it. The gray hour before dawn when the world holds its breath. Alara chambered around. The metallic sound was loud in the mountain stillness. 4 hours, she said. Then we find out if impossible is just another word for difficult. Toby settled behind his spotter scope. For the record, I was wrong about you. You didn't know me well enough to be wrong about me. I made assumptions. That's the same thing. She considered that. Yes, it is. They waited in silence after that, the mountain breathing around them. The compound below slowly waking to its last morning of believing it was safe. At hour 67, Alara put her eye to the scope. Found the water tower. Found the man who'd been there for 3 days, believing he was the hunter. And she showed him what it meant to be prey. The shot that opened this story. The shot that started the sequence. The shot that proved to everyone watching Kane Toby, the 8 remaining mercenaries herself, that impossible was just a measurement error. That she was exactly what she'd always been, a reaper. And it was harvest time. The second target died before he understood what the sound meant. North Ridge left position, range 847 meters. Wind quartering from the northwest at 6.4 kilometers per hour. Temperature differential creating a slight thermal updraft at 600 meters. That would push the round high by approximately 2.1 inches if she didn't compensate. She compensated. The man had 3 seconds of processing delay after the water tower shooter dropped. 3 seconds where his brain tried to determine direction of fire, tried to assess threat, tried to understand that the web of protection they'd built around this compound was coming apart. Alara didn't give him a fourth second. Northridge left down, Toby said, his voice flat as concrete. Wind holding, you have your window. She was already on the third target, Northridge Center. This one was smarter. She could see him shifting position, trying to get behind better cover, understanding now that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The shot caught him mid-movement, the worst possible time to be hit, when your body is unbalanced, when your weight is transitioning, when you can't even brace for the impact. He fell badly, the kind of fall that told everyone watching that he wasn't getting back up. Northridge Center down, Toby confirmed. Reaper, you're 18 seconds into the sequence. Rate is good. 18 seconds, 2 targets, 7 to go. She shifted to the fourth position. Northridge right, the one that should have been there, the one that should have been completing the northern defensive line. Empty. Toby, I see it, he's gone. Alara's mind ran the calculation in under a second. 12-minute patrol rotation observed on day 2. If he'd started his circuit before she took the first shot, he'd be somewhere along the ridge out of position, vulnerable. If he hadn't started his circuit, he'd heard the shots and moved deliberately, which meant he was hunting. Call it, she said, unknown. I had him marked at that position 4 minutes ago. He's either on rotation or he's mobile. She made the decision. Proceeding to east wall, we come back for him. Reaper if he's repositioned for counterfire. Then we deal with it when it happens. She found the fifth target. East wall upper position, the one with the wider arc, the one who could cover the HRT team's final approach if she left him operational for another 30 seconds. The difficulty was the partial obstruction. He was behind a hunting blind, only his right shoulder and the side of his head visible. A target area about the size of a dinner plate at 940 meters. Most snipers would wait for a better shot. Alara didn't have time to wait. East wall upper, she said. Partial obstruction. Right shoulder and neck exposed. That's a tight window, but Toby said. That's enough. She fired. The shoulder disappeared from view in a way that meant the man attached to it had stopped being a problem. Down, Toby confirmed. Lower position is adjusting. He heard something. The sixth target was already in her crosshairs. East wall lower. The man who just realized his partner was gone, who was bringing his rifle up trying to find the threat, his head turning left and right in that universal gesture of a predator who's just become prey and doesn't understand how it happened. She ended his confusion. East wall clear, Toby said, and then his voice changed, tightened. Reaper, movement inside the compound. 2 individuals in the courtyard. Alara didn't shift her focus, didn't let the new information disrupt her sequence. Description. Can't determine specifics through the thermal, but they're moving deliberately, not panicked. One of them just stopped. Where north interior wall, Toby paused. He's looking up, at the north ridge. The cold thing that lived in Alara's chest, the thing that had lived there since she was 7 years old and watched her mother die by degrees moved. He knows, she said. Knows what? About the shots. The north ridge shooter, the one who went mobile. He didn't go on patrol rotation. Then where? He went to report in. She kept her eye to the scope, tracking to the 7th position. Southern approach. They have an internal comms protocol that doesn't go over radio. He walked down to deliver the message. Toby absorbed this. If that's true, they know about at least some of the kills, which means they're alerting, which means the North Ridge shooter isn't coming back to his position. Then where is he? Repositioning, trying to vector on my location. The silence on their position was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Reaper, Toby said carefully. If he's moving to counter you and I can't find him, find him. It wasn't a request. Alara shifted to the 7th target, southern approach 3rd rock formation, exactly where she'd predicted 67 hours ago. The man was still there, still watching his sector, completely unaware that 7 of his colleagues had just been erased from existence. Range 122 meters, slight uphill trajectory. Wind consistent with her earlier calls. She fired. The man folded. Southern approach down, Toby said. Then immediately, Reaper, I've got thermal movement. Possible signature moving parallel to the ridge coming west. Distance, 400 meters, maybe less. If it's him, he's trying to flank your position. 400 meters, close, very close for a man she hadn't planned on being mobile and hunting. How long before he has an angle? At his current pace, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. The HRT team was 8 minutes from the outer perimeter. She had 7 targets, down 1 ghost on the ridge, and 1 unconfirmed position that might or might not exist. And somewhere inside that compound, 2 men who now knew their defensive network was collapsing. "Give me the 8th position," she said. "You want to take the roof sniper now? I want to clear what I can clear before the North Ridge problem becomes the North Ridge crisis." Toby adjusted his spotter scope. Secondary structure northeast corner, range 1,491 meters. He's prone behind a parapet. I'm only getting partial thermal. Head and upper shoulders visible. 1,491 meters. In these conditions, with a target that small, and her hands were starting to shake. Not much, not yet. Just the first suggestion of tremor. The way your hands shake after holding something too long. After asking muscles to maintain tension for 67 hours with only 20-minute intervals of rest. She looked at her fingers, watched them, studied the micro-movements with clinical detachment. 2.4 hertz frequency, regular, predictable, which meant she could work with it. Wind, she asked. Quartering right, varying between 44 and 52 kilometers per hour. Thermal spiral at 1,200 meters. Updraft. You'll need to account for at least 6 inches of vertical drift. She ran the calculation. Distance, wind, temperature, thermal dynamics, bullet drop, and now tremor frequency. The math was complex but not impossible. Nothing was impossible. Impossible was just a word people used when they didn't want to do the work. "He has sightline on the HRT final approach," Toby said. "If you don't take him now..." "I know." She closed her eyes and she listened. Not to Toby, not to the wind, not to the mountain, to her father's voice. 20 years ago, the first time he'd taken her shooting, and she'd cried because her small hands couldn't hold the rifle steady. "Sarah Bear," he'd said, using the nickname that was hers alone. "You're trying to stop the shake. Don't. You can't fight your body. You have to dance with it." "I don't understand." "Feel the rhythm. Your tremor has a pattern, a frequency. Find the space between the beats." She'd been 10 years old and thought he was talking nonsense. Now at 28, she understood he'd been teaching her physics. She opened her eyes, put the crosshairs on the target 1,491 meters away, felt the tremor in her hands. 2.4 hertz, peak to trough to peak. A wave pattern. She breathed into it, matched her breathing to the rhythm. Found the spaces. And between one shake and the next in that 0.4-second window where her hands were transitionally still, she fired. The bullet's flight time was 4.2 seconds, long enough to think about all the ways this could fail. Long enough to calculate the variables she might have missed. Long enough to wonder if Kane had been right 4 years ago. Long enough to see the thermal signature on the roof disappear. "Target down," Toby said, and his voice had something in it she'd never heard before. Something like awe. "Reaper, that was 8 confirmed," she said, cutting him off. "HRT status. 6 minutes to outer perimeter. The North Ridge counter sniper. I lost him. Thermal's not picking up anything in the expected vector." Which meant either he'd gone to ground or he'd moved outside Toby's scan radius, or he was using some technique to mask his heat signature. Or he was good enough that Toby simply couldn't track him. "Keep looking," she said. The radio crackled, Kane's voice tight with controlled tension. "Reaper HRT leader is requesting corridor status. Corridors clear, 8 positions neutralized, 1 mobile contact unaccounted for, 2 possible reserve assets interior compound. Copy, HRT is proceeding." She could hear it in his voice. The surprise, the recalibration. The beginning of understanding that maybe, just maybe, he'd measured wrong 4 years ago. But there wasn't time to enjoy it because Toby had gone very still beside her. "Reaper," he said quietly. "I found him. We're 300 meters, north-northwest. He stopped moving. He's trying to vector. 300 meters. That was close enough to see her muzzle flash. Close enough to calculate her position within a 50-meter radius. Close enough to start compressing his search pattern until he had her exact location. "Can you get a shot?" she asked. Toby hesitated. The hesitation told her everything. "Not with confidence. My angle is wrong, maybe 40% probability." 40% meant 60% chance of a miss. A miss told the counter sniper exactly where Toby was. And Toby, unlike Alara, wasn't dug into a position optimized for concealment. "Don't take it," she said. "Then what?" "He's moving again," Toby said. "South, using the rock line for cover. He's staying off the skyline." Smart, professional, exactly what she'd do. If he keeps his current heading, he's going to cross a 15-meter open section in about 90 seconds. 15 meters of open ground, a target moving fast trying to minimize exposure. A counter sniper who understood that crossing open terrain was dangerous, but sometimes necessary to get the angle you needed. "Can you redirect me?" she asked. "Stand by." Toby's voice was pure concentration now. "I need him to commit to the crossing. If he changes vector mid-approach, I'll lose the call." 60 seconds. The HRT team was 5 minutes from the outer perimeter. Somewhere in the compound, two men were making decisions about what to do now that their defensive network had dissolved. And 300 meters away, a professional hunter was closing the distance. 60 seconds to the gap, Toby said. Elara shifted her rifle, adjusted her position by inches, felt her body temperature now probably down to 94.8 degrees Fahrenheit, felt the tremor in her hands getting worse, felt the exhaustion in her muscles like sand grinding against bone, felt all of it, and put it aside, because this was the moment her father had trained her for. Not the easy shots, not the shots where everything was optimal. The shots where your body was failing and your equipment was at its limit and the target was good enough to kill you if you gave him the chance. The shots where impossible met preparation and found out which one was stronger. 45 seconds, Toby said. She closed her eyes, listened to the wind. 42 hertz, northwest. The frequency told her it was consistent, predictable. No gusts incoming for at least the next 2 minutes. 30 seconds. He's accelerating. He wants to be through the gap fast. Of course he did, because he was good, because he understood exposure, because he'd probably made this kind of crossing 100 times and survived every one. 20 seconds. Elara opened her eyes, found the gap through her scope, pre-placed her aim on the spot he would cross, the exact point where the terrain funneled him into a predictable path. 10 seconds. She felt her heartbeat, slow, controlled. 54 beats per minute. The beat of someone whose cardiovascular system had been trained to operate in the space between calm and dead. 5, 4, 3. Her finger took the first pressure on the trigger. He's entering the gap. You have him. The counter sniper crossed into the open, exactly where she'd predicted, exactly when Toby had called it. She fired between heartbeats. The man made it 8 of the 15 meters before the bullet arrived. He didn't make the other 7. Down, Toby said. And for a single moment, she heard something in his voice that was not professional, not technical, not the calibrated instrument voice they both used. It was relief, raw human barely contained relief. That was the wolf, he said. That was Dmitry Morozov. 340 confirmed kills. Chechnya, Syria, Ukraine. That was the most dangerous man on this mountain, and he stopped. How did you know where he'd crossed? Terrain analysis. There were only 3 viable routes from his last position to a counter-fire angle on us. 2 were longer. He was in a hurry. You're not human, Toby said. I'm very human. I'm just very prepared. The radio crackled again, Kane's voice, and this time there was something different in it. Reaper HRT is at the outer perimeter. Corridor status. All fixed positions neutralized. Mobile counter sniper neutralized. Corridor is clear for approach. A pause. Longer than necessary for acknowledgement. Then, outstanding work, Reaper. Continue overwatch during breach. She didn't respond. Just watch through the scope as the HRT team moved into position. 12 operators in full tactical gear approaching the compound with the coordinated precision of men who'd done this hundreds of times. They breached the main entrance with a flashbang and synchronized entry. The compressed crack of the explosion reached her position 2 seconds later, muffled by distance. Then the controlled chaos of room clearing, voices on the radio, movement, the systematic processing of a structure by professionals who knew their craft, and then the words that changed everything. Command, this is HRT-1. Primary target is not in compound. Repeat, Grayson is not here. Evidence of recent departure. Vehicle tracks heading northeast. Elara felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with her low body temperature. Toby, she said, the second vehicle. What? The second vehicle that entered the compound on day 1, the one that never left. He checked his observation log, then checked it again. It's not in the courtyard anymore, he said, and his voice had gone very quiet. I don't know, I was tracking the counter sniper. I wasn't watching the compound interior. I missed it. She ran the timeline. 8 targets in approximately 8 minutes. Her full attention on the sequence. Toby's full attention on supporting her, then on finding the mobile threat. Someone in that compound had been watching. had understood what was happening, had seen the positions go silent one by one, had made the decision to extract Grayson while she was engaged. They'd used her sequence as cover. HRT is searching the compound, Kane said over the radio. Intel sweep for location data. Reaper, did you observe any vehicle movement? Negative. Command, full attention was on threat positions. Copy. Stand by. Alara lowered her rifle. Not much, just enough to scan the compound with her naked eye, looking for what she'd missed, looking for the moment when everything had changed. And then she heard it. The sound didn't belong to the mountain, didn't belong to the wind, didn't belong to anything natural. A footstep. Behind her. Close. 6 feet. Maybe 8. Elevated. Coming from the secondary draw, not the main approach they'd used. The ninth man. Every piece of training she'd ever received compressed into a single instruction that ran through her mind in her father's voice. Don't turn your head. Turning your head is how you die. She didn't turn her head. Toby, she said, her voice at conversation volume, but absolutely level. Contact. My 6. Don't move. She felt him freeze beside her, felt the mountain hold its breath. The person behind her took another step. Closer. She could hear the fabric of his clothing now, could hear his breathing. Controlled. Professional. He knew exactly where she was, which meant someone had told him. Her right hand moved with the practiced precision of 10,000 repetitions. Not fast. Fast created noise, and noise ended this before it started. Just smooth. Inevitable. Her fingers found the grip of the M18 pistol at her side. She was calculating. Distance by sound, 8 feet. Position by acoustic reflection, behind and left. Elevation, he'd come down the draw, which put him about 2 feet higher than her prone position. He was bringing his weapon to bear. She could hear the shift in his breathing, the micro-adjustment of his stance. She had maybe 2 seconds before he fired. 1 second to decide. 1 second to move. She used both. Alara rolled, not away from the threat, toward it. The move her father had drilled into her until it stopped being a technique and became reflex. Toward, because away was predictable. Away was what people expected. Away gave the shooter time to track and adjust. Toward, collapsed the distance. Toward, disrupted the firing solution. Toward, turned defense into offense in the time it took to complete the roll. She came up on her right knee with the M18 rising, saw the figure in dark clothing, saw the rifle coming down, saw the expression on his face in the moonlight, surprised the beginning of recalculation, the understanding that something had gone very wrong with his approach. She fired twice. Center mass. The shots that ended arguments, the man went down hard. For 3 seconds, she didn't move, stayed in her kneeling position. Weapon up, scanning left, right, behind. Because the first contact was sometimes meant to flush you, meant to make you reveal yourself, so the second contact had a clean shot. She waited. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed except the mountain and her own controlled exhale. Reaper, Toby said, and his voice was stripped raw. Report. 1 contact down, checking for secondary. I have your position, scanning your perimeter. A pause. No additional heat signatures within 100 meters. She lowered the pistol slightly, moved to the body. Young, she registered, maybe 25. Professional gear, radio in his vest pocket. The radio was still transmitting. She picked it up, listened, heard breathing on the other end, then a click as someone disconnected. He was feeding information to someone, she said. Live feed. They know their asset failed. Which means they know you're still operational. Which means they're making decisions right now. She keyed her command radio. Reaper to command. 1 mobile contact neutralized at close range. Asset had active radio transmission. Compromise is likely. Kane's response was immediate. Define compromise. Someone was monitoring this position. They now know their 9th man failed to neutralize the overwatch. Copy. Intel is analyzing compound communications. Stand by. Negative, sir. Request immediate language asset. The radio is still hot. A pause, then, sending specialists to your frequency now. 30 seconds later, a new voice came on the radio. Female. Accent suggesting Eastern European background. Reaper, this is Siren. I'm your translator. Put the radio on open channel. Alara held the captured radio up to her headset. The specialist listened for 10 seconds. They're speaking Chechen. 2 voices. One is asking for confirmation of the American's status. The other is not responding. A pause. First voice is now saying, if she's still alive, the corridor is open. Execute secondary. What's secondary? Alara asked. Unknown. Transmission just ended. Alara looked at Toby. They had a backup plan. Something for if the primary defense failed, which means the extraction wasn't improvised. This was planned. The pieces fell into place. The Chechen mercenaries, the professional defensive network, the vehicle that departed during her engagement sequence, the ninth man with a live radio feed. This wasn't just security. This was counterintelligence. This was an operation designed to protect Grayson not from assault, but from capture. Someone had known the FBI was coming. Someone had planned an extraction. Someone inside the mission cell had told them where to find her. Toby, she said, who knew my exact position? He understood the question immediately. Mission cell, Yumi Kane, the HRT leader, the intel officer, the comms officer. He stopped. And Lieutenant Garrett Ashford, the liaison who was added to the cell 48 hours ago. The cold thing in her chest moved again. When was he added? Right after the Chechen intercept came in. When Kane requested the secondary HRT element, Alara keyed her radio. Reaper to command, request immediate background check on Lieutenant Garrett Ashford. Timeline, when was he added to the mission cell, and what access level does he have? The response took longer this time. She could picture Kane in the TOC, cross-referencing, pulling files, starting to see the shape of what she was seeing. When he came back on, his voice had changed. Blackwell Ashford was added 48 hours ago. Access level full operational brief, including Overwatch position grids. Sir, I need to know where he is right now. Another pause. Blackwell, he left the TOC 11 minutes ago. Said he was running diagnostics on the communications array. Sir, he's running. You don't know that. I know he had access to my position. I know he was added to the cell when the threat level increased. I know someone just told 2 Chechen contractors that the corridor is open and to execute secondary. She paused. Sir, where was Grayson's vehicle heading? She heard Kane typing. Satellite track shows northeast. Toward, he stopped. Toward what, sir? Toward the secondary HRT element's position. And there it was, the shape of the whole thing. Grayson hadn't fled randomly. He'd fled toward extraction, toward a blocking force that was supposed to be FBI but had been compromised. Toward Ashford. How long until Grayson reaches the secondary element? She asked. 9 minutes at current speed. Sir, you need to alert that team. Right now. I can't. Ashford's handling their communications. If he's compromised, using the standard channel tips him off. Then use a non-standard channel. I don't have one. Alara felt her body temperature drop another degree. Felt the exhaustion in her muscles. Felt the tremor in her hands getting worse. Felt all of it. And made her decision. Sir, give me coordinates for the secondary element's position. Why, Bravo? Because I'm going to stop Grayson before he gets there. Reaper, you're 68 hours into position. Your core temperature is critical. You need immediate extraction. I need coordinates, sir. That's an order, Staff Sergeant. Extract now. For the second time in this operation, Alara reached up and removed her earpiece. Removed Kane's voice. Removed his authority. Removed everything except the mission and the math and the shot that needed to be made. Reaper, Toby said quietly. What are you doing? Finishing it. She looked at him. I need coordinates for the Northeast Road Junction, satellite track on Grayson's vehicle, and your best estimate on where I can get a firing solution. Alara. I'm not asking for permission, Toby. I'm asking for data. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he pulled up his tablet. Northeast Junction is 4.2 kilometers from here. Vehicle is approaching at approximately 65 kilometers per hour. There's an overlook position that gives you line of sight to the road. Range, 823 meters. But Alara, you can barely stand. Your hands are shaking. That's a moving target in degraded conditions with, I know what it is. She stood up, her legs held. Barely. How do we get there? Toby looked at her, really looked at her, saw the determination, saw the exhaustion, saw the tremor that was getting worse by the minute, and he made his choice. Helicopter, he said. There's one on standby for medical extraction. 6 minutes to get here, 8 minutes to the overlook. Call it. He keyed his radio. Command, this is Spotter 2, requesting immediate medical extraction, helicopter to current position. Priority urgent. Kane's voice came back, tight with controlled fury. Negative, Spotter 2. That extraction is for Reaper once she's back on comms. Put her on the radio. Sir, she's making a tactical decision. That's not her call to make. Toby looked at Alara. She nodded once. Sir, Toby said, With all due respect, she just saved 12 HRT operators. She neutralized 9 professional contractors, including Dmitry Morozov. She identified a compromise in the mission cell. I'm calling the helicopter. Out. He switched off his radio. You just ended your career, Alara said. Maybe. He started packing his gear with rapid efficiency. But I'd rather be unemployed than wrong about you again. The sound of the helicopter blades reached them 4 minutes later. The chopper settled into a clearing 50 meters from their position, and they ran for it through snow and darkness and the last reserves of strength that 68 hours had left them. The pilot didn't ask questions, just lifted off the moment they were aboard and banked hard northeast. Through the open door, Alara could see the compound falling away below them, see the lights of the HRT team still searching for intelligence that would tell them where Grayson had gone. She pulled her earpiece back in. Kane's voice was immediate. Blackwell, what the hell do you think you're doing? My job, sir. Your job was Overwatch. My job is stopping the target. Grayson's heading toward your secondary element, and you can't warn them without alerting Ashford. So I'm warning them differently. By doing what? By stopping his vehicle before it gets there. Silence on the radio, the kind of silence that happened when someone was recalculating everything they thought they knew. You can't make that shot, Kane said finally. Not in your condition. Watch me. The helicopter covered the distance in 8 minutes, dropped them at an overlook position that gave a clear line of sight to the Northeast Road junction. Then lifted off again, the pilot understanding without being told that what happened next needed to happen without witnesses. Alara set up her rifle. The familiar weight, the familiar geometry, the familiar sense of the weapon becoming an extension of her body, except her body was failing now. Core temperature probably down to 94.5 degrees. Hands shaking at 2.6 hertz. Vision starting to tunnel at the edges. She had maybe one shot left in her. Maybe. Vehicle approaching, Toby said, scanning with the thermal scope. 2 minutes out. Speed holding at 65 kilometers per hour. Wind, gusting 38 to 52 kilometers per hour, quartering left. Impossible conditions. Impossible target. Impossible shot. But impossible, she'd learned, was just another word for difficult. And difficult was where she lived. I need you to trust me, she said. I do. Then don't try to talk me out of what I'm about to do. She closed her eyes one last time, listened to the wind, felt the rhythm of her tremor, calculated the intersection of a dozen variables that most people couldn't even name, and she waited for the vehicle that carried a man responsible for 17 deaths to drive into her world. 1 minute, Toby said. Alara opened her eyes, and she prepared to show everyone what impossible really meant. The vehicle appeared as a pair of headlights cutting through the mountain darkness, moving fast along the northeast road, like something fleeing rather than escaping. There was a difference. Escaping suggested planning control, deliberate extraction. Fleeing was what happened when the plan fell apart, and all that remained was speed and hope. Silas Grayson was fleeing. Alara tracked the headlights through her scope. The vehicle was a Toyota Land Cruiser older model civilian configuration. She'd watched it enter the compound 67 hours ago carrying what she'd estimated as 8 people based on the suspension compression. Only one had come out, which meant 7 were still back at the compound, dead or detained. Either way, no longer a factor. Range to intercept point, she said. Toby checked his calculations. 823 meters. Vehicle will cross your firing solution in 90 seconds at current speed. Wind, quartering left gusting between 41 and 53 kilometers per hour. Thermal patterns are unstable. You're going to have significant lateral drift. She knew. She'd already run the ballistics in her head. At 823 meters with that wind variance, the bullet could drift anywhere from 14 to 22 inches left, depending on when she fired relative to the gust cycle. The solution was timing. Wait for the low point in the gust cycle. Fire during the predictable window. Except there was another problem. Her hands. The tremor had progressed from 2.4 hertz to 2.8 hertz. Faster, less predictable. The kind of shake that came from muscles that had been asked to maintain tension for 68 hours and were now beginning the process of systematic failure. She looked at her fingers wrapped around the rifle grip, watched them vibrate, studied the pattern with the same clinical detachment she'd study any mechanical problem. The peaks were getting higher, the troughs less stable. Her firing window was shrinking. 60 seconds, Toby said. She closed her eyes. Not to pray. Alara Blackwell didn't pray. She calculated. But for a moment, just a moment, she let herself remember. Her father's ranch in Oregon, age 10, standing at the rifle range with tears streaming down her face because she couldn't hold the gun steady enough to hit the target at 200 yards. Her father kneeling beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice patient and certain. Sarah Bear, you're fighting the shake. Don't fight it. Dance with it. I don't understand, Daddy. Your body has a rhythm. Feel it. The shake isn't random, it's a wave. Find the spaces between the waves. She dried her tears, closed her eyes, felt the tremor in her small hands. And for the first time, she'd stopped trying to force stillness and instead found the stillness that already existed inside the movement. The shot had been perfect. Her father had smiled. That's my girl. 3 years later, her mother died. Cancer that started in her lungs and spread until there was nothing left to spread to. Alara had been 13. Had watched the strongest woman she'd ever known reduced to something that weighed 87 pounds and couldn't remember her daughter's name. The night her mother died, her father had taken her to the range. They hadn't spoken, hadn't needed to. He just handed her a rifle and let her shoot until the grief transformed into something manageable. That was when she'd understood. The shooting wasn't about killing, it was about control. About finding the one thing in a chaotic universe that responded predictably to skill and preparation and will. Her mother's body had betrayed her, had grown cells that didn't follow the rules, had failed in ways that no amount of preparation could prevent. But a bullet followed the laws of physics. Always. Inevitably. Perfectly. If you did everything right, the bullet went where you told it to go. That was the gift her father had given her. Not the shooting, the certainty. 40 seconds, Toby said, pulling her back. Alara opened her eyes. The vehicle was closer now. She could make out details through the scope. Single occupant visible through the windshield. Driver hunched forward, gripping the wheel with the body language of someone who understood they were running out of time. 30 seconds. She felt her heartbeat. 52 beats per minute, slower than it should be given the circumstances. But her body had learned over 68 hours that elevated heart rate cost precision. Her cardiovascular system had adapted, had found a rhythm that balanced consciousness with efficiency. The tremor in her hands peaked, settled, peaked again. 2.8 hertz, which meant the full cycle took 0.36 seconds, which meant she had approximately 0.18 seconds at each trough where her hands were transitionally still. 0.18 seconds. Most people couldn't react in 0.18 seconds. Couldn't recognize the window, make the decision, execute the trigger press. But Alara Blackwell had spent 20 years training for exactly this moment, for the shot that existed in the impossible space between human limitation and mechanical precision. 20 seconds. He's not slowing. Of course he wasn't slowing. He thought he was home. Thought the secondary HRT element ahead was his extraction, not his capture. Thought Lieutenant Ashford had arranged everything perfectly. He was about to learn what happened when your intelligence was compromised by someone who saw patterns you didn't know existed. 15 seconds. She felt the wind. Listened to it. The frequency had shifted down to 38 hertz. The gust cycle was reaching its low point. She had maybe 6 seconds of relatively stable air. 10 seconds. Her finger moved to the trigger. First pressure, 2 pounds of the 5-pound pull. 5 seconds. Reaper, if you're gonna take this shot. I know. The vehicle entered the firing solution. 823 meters away, moving at 65 kilometers per hour, carrying a man who'd reduced 17 human beings to engineering problems and solved them with bombs. Alara's hands shook. Her body temperature set at 94.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Her muscles were degrading. Her vision was tunneling. She felt all of it, acknowledged all of it. And then she found the space between the tremor peaks. The space where impossible became inevitable. She fired. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder. The suppressed report cracked across the mountain. And for 1.8 seconds, the bullet flew through cold air and darkness and the accumulated doubt of everyone who'd ever told her she wasn't good enough. Through her scope, she watched the vehicle lurch. Hard. The front left corner dropped as the engine block, the specific point where fuel injection met manifold, where a single round could catastrophically compromise mechanical function, absorbed the impact. The Land Cruiser veered left, overcorrected right, the driver fighting for control he no longer had. The vehicle coasted on momentum alone, slowing, and then stopping 40 meters short of the junction where the secondary HRT element waited. Hit, Toby said, and his voice carried something she'd never heard from him. Something like reverence. Engine block, vehicle disabled. Reaper, that shot was effective, she said, cutting him off. because there wasn't room in her head right now for amazement or pride or any emotion that cost oxygen. Call it in. Toby keyed his radio to the secondary channel. Command, this is Spotter 2. Primary target's vehicle is disabled at Northeast Junction. Engine block shot. Target is contained. There was a long pause. Then Kane's voice, and it sounded like a man who'd just watched someone walk on water and wasn't sure whether to be furious or amazed. Spotter 2, did you just say engine block shot? Affirmative, sir. Range 823 meters, moving target, gusting winds. Clean hit. Another pause. Longer. Where is Reaper? Alara took the handset from Toby. Here, sir? Blackwell, you... Kane stopped. Started again. The secondary element is moving to secure Grayson now. They're reporting one occupant alive, injured, but stable. Match for the target description. Copy, sir. You were ordered to extract. Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. She waited for the reprimand, the formal language that would end her career, the consequences of putting mission completion above chain of command. Instead, Kane said, why the engine block? Why not the driver? The question surprised her. She'd expected anger, not curiosity, because the mission objective was to extract Grayson alive for interrogation, sir. Killing the driver risked the vehicle crashing at speed. Risked killing the target. The engine block was the solution that preserved the objective. You made that calculation in how long? It wasn't a calculation, sir. It was the only logical choice. The silence that followed had a different quality. Not anger, not even surprise anymore. Something closer to recognition. Blackwell, Kane said finally. 4 years ago, I dismissed you from Scout Sniper School. I told myself it was because you failed the physical standards, that you didn't have what it takes. She didn't respond, didn't know what to say. I was wrong, Kane said. Not partially wrong, not wrong about one thing, wrong about everything. You just conducted the most effective single-operator defensive engagement I've witnessed in 25 years. Against professional contractors. In impossible conditions. After 68 hours without rest. Sir, I'm not finished. You identified a compromise in the mission cell. You stopped an extraction operation. You disabled a fleeing vehicle with a shot that 99% of qualified snipers couldn't make on a range, let alone in the field. She heard him take a breath, a deliberate, controlled breath. And you did it with a core body temperature that should have made you non-functional. With hands that were shaking, after I told you that you weren't good enough. Sir, the mission is complete because you ignored every limitation I tried to place on you. His voice shifted. Medical is on the way to your position. You're going to Walter Reed whether you like it or not. And when you're stable, we're going to have a very long conversation about what happened here. Yes, sir. Good. A pause. Blackwell. Sir. Outstanding work. Truly outstanding. The transmission ended. Alara lowered the radio, lowered her rifle. And for the first time in 68 hours, she let herself stop being a machine. Her legs gave out, not dramatically, not like in movies where people collapse in slow motion. Just her muscles stopped holding her upright, and she sat down hard on the frozen ground. Toby was there immediately. Reaper, Alara. You okay? Fine, she said automatically. Then more honestly, no, not fine, but functional. Medical is inbound, 4 minutes. She nodded, tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. Don't, Toby said. Just sit. You've done enough. Had she? The mission was complete. Grayson was in custody. The threat network neutralized. But somewhere out there, Lieutenant Garrett Ashford was still running, still compromised, still a vector for whoever had hired the Chechen contractors. Ashford, she said, Kane's people are on it. They'll get him. He had help. Someone paid for the Chechens. Someone planned the extraction. That's not your problem anymore. Wasn't it? She'd spent 68 hours preventing something. But prevention wasn't the same as solution. The web was bigger than one compound, bigger than one traitor. The helicopter arrived 3 minutes later. Medical personnel rushed to her position with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. They took her vitals, made concerned noises about her core temperature, started an IV, wrapped her in thermal blankets that felt like being buried in warm sand. You're hypothermic, the lead medic said. Stage 2 approaching stage 3. Another few hours and we'd be looking at organ failure. But not now, Alara said. Not now, but it's close. How long were you in position? 68 hours. The medic blinked. 68? You were in a static position for 68 hours in these temperatures. Yes. That's not, people don't survive that. I did. They loaded her into the helicopter. Toby climbed in beside her, refusing to leave despite the medic's suggestions that he debrief separately. As the helicopter lifted off, Alara looked down at the mountain, at the compound where 8 mercenaries had believed they were hunters, at the ridge where she'd spent nearly 3 days becoming something other than human, at the place where she'd proven that impossible was just a measurement error. Her eyes closed, not sleep, just rest, just the first moment in 68 hours where she could let her guard down without people dying. The flight to Walter Reed took 90 minutes. She was conscious for most of it, drifting in and out of awareness as the medics monitored her vitals and adjusted her treatment. At some point, Toby said, "I need to tell you something." She opened her eyes. "When we started this mission, I thought you were going to get us killed. I thought Kane was right, that you were a liability." "I know." "How did you know?" "Because everyone thinks that. It's the default assumption." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife's pregnant, 6 months. We found out it's a girl. Congratulations. We're naming her Alara." That made her open her eyes fully. "You don't have to." "I do, because I spent 68 hours watching you do the impossible while I doubted you. I need the reminder. Need my daughter to have a name that means I check my assumptions before I make them." Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. "I'm sorry," Toby said, "for doubting you." "You didn't know me. Doubt is rational." "No, it's lazy. It's defaulting to bias instead of observation. That's what I'm teaching my daughter not to do." The helicopter touched down at Walter Reed just before dawn. They wheeled her into emergency care, where a team of doctors did exactly what the field medic had done, but with better equipment and more concerned expressions. Kidney function compromised but recovering. Core temperature, 95.1 degrees and rising. Muscle degradation significant but not critical. Nerve damage in her extremities, minor, probably temporary. She'd survive. They kept her for 48 hours. Observation, rehydration, waiting for her kidneys to prove they could handle normal function without dialysis. Kane visited on the second day. He stood in the doorway of her hospital room for a long moment, just looking at her. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. Finally, he walked in, pulled up a chair, sat down with the careful movements of a man who was carrying something heavy. "Grayson's talking," he said. "Gave up 4 networks, 2 active, 1 in planning stages, 1 that we'd already identified but couldn't prove. He's providing names, methods, material sources. Because of you, we're going to dismantle the entire infrastructure he built." "Good." "Lieutenant Ashford was arrested 6 hours after your engine block shot. He was attempting to cross into Mexico. Had $50,000 in cash and a phone full of communications with a private intelligence contractor based in Dubai." Alora absorbed this. "The contractor hired the Chechens." "Yes, the arrangement was that they'd extract Grayson during our assault. Ashford provided operational details. In exchange, he got $250,000 and relocation assistance. He sold out an FBI operation for $250,000. People have sold out for less." Kane paused. "The contractor wanted Grayson's engineering expertise, specifically his knowledge of American vehicle armor vulnerabilities. They were planning to sell that information to the highest bidder. And now they won't." "No, because you stopped it." The silence stretched. Kane seemed to be building towards something, some speech he'd rehearsed. "4 years ago," he said finally, "I signed your dismissal paperwork. I wrote in the evaluation that you lacked the physical resilience for extended field operations, that your body temperature regulation issues made you unsuitable for extreme environment deployments. I remember. There was a medical note attached to your file. It said that your low body temperature might be an adaptive trait rather than a dysfunction, that it could actually provide advantages in cold weather operations. I read it. I ignored it, decided that the standards were the standards and you didn't meet them." He looked at her directly. "I was protecting my own assumptions, protecting the idea that I knew what a qualified sniper looked like. You didn't fit that image, so I rejected the data that contradicted my conclusion." Ilara said nothing. "On this operation, that dysfunction defeated thermal imaging, allowed you to maintain a static position for 68 hours without hypothermia reaching critical levels until the very end. Gave you an advantage that a normal operator wouldn't have had." "Yes. I measured the wrong things, Blackwell. I measured endurance over excellence, physical conformity over tactical genius, what you looked like over what you could do." "People do that," Alara said. "It's normal." "Normal isn't acceptable. Not when it costs us operators like you. He pulled a folder from his jacket. This is your Scout Sniper School dismissal. I've submitted a formal review request. Medical board has agreed that the original standards were misapplied. You're being offered retroactive certification. He placed the folder on her bedside table. Alara looked at it, the thing she'd wanted for 4 years. The validation that she'd been right and they'd been wrong. The badge that said she was good enough. No, she said. Kane blinked. What? I'm declining. Blackwell, this is a full Scout Sniper certification. This is something I don't need anymore. She looked at him. 4 years ago, being dismissed broke something in me, made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. But it also freed me. Freed you how? From needing your approval, from needing anyone's approval. I spent 68 hours on that mountain proving I was good enough. Not to you, to myself. I know who I am now. I don't need a badge to confirm it. Kane stared at her. You're turning down Scout Sniper certification. Yes, sir. Why? Because what I need isn't to be validated by the system that rejected me. What I need is to make sure the next person who doesn't fit the mold has better data to work with. She pointed to the folder. Keep that. Make it a case study. Show it to every instructor who thinks they know what qualified looks like. Let them see what happens when you measure the wrong things. Maybe the next Alara Blackwell doesn't waste 4 years proving she was right all along. Kane picked up the folder, held it like it weighed more than paper should weigh. What will you do? He asked. I don't know yet, but it won't be this. I've proven what I needed to prove. He stood, walked to the door, stopped. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, you're the best natural shooter I've ever trained. Even when I was too blind to see it, some part of me knew it. That's why your dismissal bothered me for 4 years, because I knew I was wrong and didn't want to admit it. Sir, I'm sorry, Blackwell. Truly, deeply sorry. You deserve better than what I gave you. He left before she could respond. Alara looked at the ceiling, felt the IV in her arm, felt her body temperature slowly returning to something approaching normal, felt the exhaustion of 68 hours finally catching up to her now that it was safe to feel it. And she smiled, not a big smile, just a small one. The smile of someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side holding exactly what they'd gone in to find. Not victory, understanding. They discharged her 6 weeks later. By then, Grayson had given up everything. 4 networks dismantled, 17 arrests, 3 planned attacks prevented. The FBI offered her a position as a training instructor. She declined. The CIA reached out about a contract role. She declined. Private security firms sent offers that started at $200,000 a year. She declined all of them. Instead, she went home. To her father's ranch in Oregon. To the place where she'd first learned to shoot. Where her mother had taught her that the greatest gift wasn't the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when not to. She found her father in the barn working on a fence that didn't particularly need working on. He looked up when she walked in, took in her appearance, the weight she'd lost, the fatigue that still lingered around her eyes. Heard about Big Bear, he said, officially anyway. Used your lesson, the tremor, the rhythm. I knew you would, Sarah Bear. She hadn't been called that in years. The nickname her mother had given her. The name that belonged to the girl who'd cried at the rifle range because she couldn't hold steady. Dad, I finally understand the gift isn't the shooting. What is it? Knowing when not to. I found my peace. I know who I am now. Her father's eyes went bright. Your mother would be so proud. They stood there in the barn while the afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the walls and the Oregon wind made its music through the pines. What now? He asked. I want to teach. Not military. Civilian. Kids who've been told they were not good enough. People who don't fit the mold. You're going to open a school. An academy. Precision shooting, but also the mental side, the discipline, the self-knowledge. Everything shooting taught me about myself. Her father nodded slowly. Your mother would like that. Using your gifts to build instead of destroy. Will you help? Sarah Barron, I've been waiting 4 years for you to ask me that question. They started small. 15 students. First session. 6 were women who'd been told they were too weak. 2 were men over 50 who'd been told they were too old. 3 were teenagers from difficult backgrounds who'd been told they were too undisciplined. All of them had been measured by the wrong standards. Alara taught them what her father had taught her, what the mountain had confirmed. That impossible was just a word for difficult. That your limitations were just variables to be calculated around. That the space between can't and won't was where everything interesting happened. On the third day of the first session, a 17-year-old girl named Rebecca stood at the 1,000-yard line shaking so badly she couldn't hold the rifle. "I can't do it," she said, tears streaming. "My hands won't stop." Alara knelt beside her, gentle, patient, the way her father had been. "You're trying to stop the shake. Don't feel the rhythm. Your body isn't fighting you, it's just moving. Find the spaces between the movements." Rebecca closed her eyes, breathed, found the rhythm, and fired. The shot was perfect, dead center at 1,000 yards on her first attempt. The girl stared at the target in disbelief. Then she started crying harder, but these were different tears. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes," Alara said, and for the first time since the mountain, she felt something that might have been joy. "You did." That night, after the students had gone home and the range was quiet, Alara's phone rang. "Dad," on the caller ID. "Hey," she answered. "How was the first session?" "Good, really good. One of the students made a 1,000-yard shot on her third day. She's 17 and has been told her whole life that her anxiety disorder makes her weak." "What did you tell her?" "That anxiety is just data, extra sensitivity to variables. And if you can channel that sensitivity, you can read conditions other people miss." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Your mother used to say something like that, about her fear before she got sick. Said it made her more aware, more present." "I remember." "Alara." "Yeah, Dad. I'm proud of you, not because of Big Bear, not because you proved Kane wrong, because you found a way to turn pain into purpose. That's the hardest thing anyone can do." She felt something in her chest, something that had been frozen for 68 hours on a mountain and was just now starting to thaw. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." After the call ended, she walked to the 1,000-yard range, set up her rifle, not because she needed to shoot, just because she wanted to. The wind was blowing northeast, 44 hertz. She could hear it singing through the valley, could feel the rhythm of it. She closed her eyes, listened. Let the mountain, any mountain, every mountain speak to her the way it always had. When she opened her eyes, she noticed something on the wall of the range building, a frame she hadn't put there. Inside it, her scout sniper patch, the one she'd declined, and a handwritten note. She walked closer, read the note. "I measured the wrong things. You measured perfectly. This belongs to you even if you don't want it. Forgive me. E. Kane." Below that, in her father's handwriting, a second note. "She already forgave you. That's who she is. But this stays here as a reminder for every student who walks through these doors, that the standards were wrong, that she was right, that impossible is just a starting line." N. Blackwell. Alara stood there as the sun set over the Oregon mountains, stood there as the temperature dropped and the wind shifted and the world prepared itself for night, and she felt at peace. Not because she'd won, not because she'd proven anything, but because she'd found the thing her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago when cancer was eating her alive and all she had left was wisdom, that the gift wasn't in the taking of life, it was in the preservation of it, in teaching, in building, in showing people that the limitations they'd accepted weren't real, were just measurements taken by people who didn't know how to measure properly. She thought about the 9 mercenaries on the mountain, thought about how they'd all died believing they were hunters, never understanding that the real hunter had been watching them for 68 hours, learning them, measuring them, finding the exact moment to act. She thought about Dmitry Morozov, the Wolf of Grozny, 340 kills across 3 continents, a professional hunter brought down by a woman the system had dismissed as not good enough. She thought about Kane, about how he'd carried his mistake for 4 years, about how he'd finally admitted it, about how forgiveness wasn't about making someone feel better. It was about releasing yourself from the weight of their judgment. And she thought about Toby's daughter, a girl not yet born who would carry the name Alara, who would grow up with a father who'd learned to check his assumptions, who would never be measured by standards that measured the wrong things. That was the real victory, not the shots, not the mission, the ripples, the changes in thinking that would extend beyond her, beyond this moment, into a future where maybe, just maybe, the next person who didn't fit the mold would have an easier time of it. She picked up her rifle, chambered around, and fired one shot at the 1,000-yard target. Perfect center, not because she needed to prove she could, but because some things were worth maintaining, some skills were worth keeping sharp, some parts of yourself were worth honoring. The shot that had saved 12 operators, the shot that had stopped an extraction, the shot that had disabled a fleeing vehicle at 823 meters with hands that were shaking and a body that was failing. That shot lived in her now, would always live in her, not as a burden, as a reminder. That impossible was just another word for difficult. That difficult was just another word for possible. And that possible was where she lived, where she'd always lived, where she'd teach others to live too. She walked back to the academy building, hung her rifle on the wall, turned off the lights. Above the door, a sign her father had commissioned, Celeste Blackwell Precision Academy, where impossible starts. Below it, smaller text, founded by Staff Sergeant Alara Blackwell, the Reaper of Big Bear. She smiled at that. The media had given her the name after the story leaked. After journalists found out about the 9 kills in 8 minutes. After someone calculated the odds of what she'd done and declared them impossible. The Reaper of Big Bear. She'd hated it at first. Hated the dramatization. Hated how it reduced 68 hours of cold calculation to a catchy headline. But her father had pointed out something important: names had power. And if people were going to tell her story anyway better, they tell it accurately. That she'd been dismissed. That she'd been doubted. That she'd been underestimated. And that she'd become the Reaper anyway. Not because they believed, because she did. That was the story that mattered. That was the lesson worth teaching. That was why when the door opened and a new student walked in, a young woman with scars on her wrists and fear in her eyes, who'd been told by everyone that she was too broken, too damaged, too much of a liability, Alara smiled and said the words her father had said to her 20 years ago. Welcome, you're going to learn something here. Not just about shooting, about yourself, about the difference between what people tell you that you are and what you actually are. The girl looked uncertain. I don't know if I can. You can't yet, Alara said, but yet is the most important word in your vocabulary, because yet means possible. And possible is where we begin. She walked the girl to the range, showed her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to find the rhythm in her own body that everyone else called weakness, but that Alara knew was just data. And as the sun set completely and the stars came out over the Oregon mountains, Alara Blackwell taught another person that impossible was just a measurement error, just like her father had taught her, just like she'd proven on a mountain in California, just like she'd prove every day for the rest of her life, because that was who she was, not a reaper, a teacher. And teaching she'd learned was the most important kind of harvest, the kind that grew.